Good morning, everyone. My name is Louise Heaps and I lead WWF's Global Sustainable Blue Economy Initiative. And I'd like to start the presentation by thanking the workshop organisers for the opportunity to speak today. The transition to a sustainable blue economy is probably one of the most pressing challenges and opportunities of our time. We are, however, at an important crossroads. On the one hand, we know that the ocean has great value, estimated by WWF in 2015 to have a value of $24 trillion in terms of total assets, releasing benefits of up to $2.5 trillion a year. And the benefits of the ocean economy are many and varied. It keeps our climate in balance, it feeds a growing population, and it supports hundreds of millions of livelihoods. But only a healthy ocean can provide these services. And we know that the ocean is now attracting a lot of attention. The OECD have estimated that the ocean economy is actually set to double in this decade, with unprecedented development already happening across many maritime sectors, including infrastructure, energy, biotechnology, food production, tourism, transport, and the list goes on. However, on the other hand, the IPBES and the Living Planet reports in 2019 both revealed that many of the indicators of ocean health are now trending in the wrong direction as a result of years of mismanagement and overexploitation of the ocean's natural resources. And this is being further exacerbated, of course, by climate change, again highlighted by the IPCC's special report on the ocean and cryosphere in a changing climate. So this is really nothing short of a biodiversity crisis. Of particular concern is this rapid and unsustainable growth in already fragmented and damaged coastal areas, with infrastructure investments alone forecast to be in the trillions. And this could actually be further exacerbated by the enormous amounts of investment being made through COVID-19 recovery and stimulus packages, if these are not guided by sustainable and equitable guardrails and guidelines. So in short, we're now facing significant challenges which are posed by loss of marine biodiversity, climate change, and now the COVID-19 pandemic. And we really need to start asking ourselves, how can our ambitions for social and economic resilience be achieved when we're actually eroding the resource base on which that resilience depends? And certainly the business as usual trajectory does entail great risk, not only to business, but to society as a whole. And this is really playing out in terms of significant financial risks. In the case of seafood, which is the most highly traded natural commodity in the world, the World Bank have now estimated losses of up to $83 billion per annum as a result of overfishing. But by contrast, have also estimated that fish catches could increase by 13% if those same fisheries were managed sustainably. And in addition, real estate in the US market with exposure to sea level rise is now selling at a 7% discount. And there are many examples of these kinds of potential stranded assets that are now coming to the fore. If managed sustainably, however, the ocean does have enormous capacity to regenerate and provide substantial gains. And if we're to assure the transition to a sustainable blue economy, we should really start focusing our attention on minimising risks and building the resilience of the ocean, particularly in the face of a changing and erratic climate. And WWF defines a sustainable blue economy as one which provides social and economic benefits for current and future generations, restores, protects and maintains diverse, productive and resilient marine ecosystems, and is based on clean technologies, renewable energy and circular material flows. And this definition underpins SDG 14 and in fact the delivery of all of the Sustainable Development Goals. So to achieve this transition, we will need substantial investment. However, the bulk of private sector investment is currently being targeted at business as usual pathways, many of which, as we know, are degrading the ocean's natural assets. And currently insufficient finance is being directed at rebuilding those natural assets, strengthening the ocean's resilience and supporting innovations and new approaches that will actually affect this transition. In fact, only $13 billion in philanthropy and overseas development assistance were invested into the sustainable ocean economy over the last 10 years, despite the fact that the ocean economy contributes significantly to the GDP of many coastal countries. And the redirection of mainstream finance to more sustainable development pathways is therefore absolutely critical if we're going to drive forward this scale of positive change that's going to be needed. And to guide the investment and finance decision towards that vision, a suite of effective financial guardrails and guidelines specific to the sustainable blue economy context are now required. So with this in mind, WWF, the European Commission, European Investment Bank and the Prince of Wales International Sustainability Unit developed a set of sustainable blue economy finance principles which were launched at the Our Ocean conference in Bali in 2018. And these 14 principles provide the first global framework to guide investment decisions and development policy towards the most sustainable development pathways possible. And it therefore ensure that ocean-related investments deliver long-term value without having compromising and having a negative impact on marine ecosystems or on efforts to reduce carbon emissions. So as such, they're designed to align with SDG 14 and to complement existing frameworks for governing responsible investments, such as the UNPRI and the by fostering cooperation and communication on everything from ocean health and scientific research to data collection and technical innovation, the principles really aim to encourage this multi-sector shift towards a sustainable blue economy. And importantly, they actually recognise that the ocean requires a systems-based approach, and that we already, in fact, have many of the necessary governance tools, regulations and approaches to build ocean resilience and to improve long-term investment opportunities. And these might include things like marine protected areas and ecosystem-based marine spatial planning. As such, they really point to the need to shift away from viewing the ocean as a nice to have towards that of being central to national economies and businesses in the long term. They also recognise the importance of compliance, of transparency and disclosure. And whilst they're voluntary and non-regulatory, we believe that widespread adoption could in fact transform future development, ensuring that mainstream financial flows are all being directed in the right way. They're now the guiding framework of UNEP-FI's Sustainable Blue Economy Finance Initiative, which now has over 36 signatories and 64 members, including both public and private sector partners such as the World Bank, European Investment Bank, Asian Development Bank, Aviva Investors, Rockefeller Asset Management and Storebrand, just to name a few. The Portuguese government have also recently endorsed the principles, and we genuinely hope that many governments will follow, given that they are entirely relevant to the public sector financing. And working with WWF and others, UNEP-FI have now also launched granular guidance to support the implementation of the principles. And this is across a number of sectors, including seafood, marine and coastal tourism, shipping, ports, and marine renewable energy. And this guidance actually outlines which activities and investments should be avoided, such as known harmful and illegal activities, which should require additional oversight and transition pathways, and which should be sought out for future investment. And along with the creation of a common blue financial taxonomy, the principles and guidance are the start of this emerging ecosystem of ocean finance guidance that's really aiming to underpin decision making that supports the transition to a sustainable blue economy. So we're now starting to address how those principles can be translated into practice, and even with those right frameworks in place to redirect mainstream finance, there are several important factors that will need to be tackled to further facilitate investment flows into the sustainable blue economy. And most significantly, finance must also be urgently redirected towards restoring, protecting and sustainably managing our ocean's natural assets as the foundation of a sustainable blue economy. And this might include the implementation of nature-based solutions, marine protected areas and marine spatial planning tools. All of these are tools which build resilience and integrity of the ocean, that's well known. And one of the most notable hindrances to the flow of private capital is actually that the ocean presents quite a high risk investment environment, not least because of its regulatory gaps and inconsistencies, significant data gaps, capacity challenges, complex tenure arrangements, lack of transparency, and of course the capacity to monitor, control and survey these huge tracts of ocean. Blended finance opportunities will therefore play a particular role in reducing this risk profile, and where this might include public and philanthropic finance being targeted at strengthening regulatory, fiscal and governance environments, including having a strong sustainable ocean plan in place. Alongside this, positive financial and market incentives should also be identified and created to encourage this transition. And whilst opportunities exist, there's simply insufficient scalable investable pipeline available. Small to medium enterprises in particular often lack the appropriate deal size and risk return ratios to match the available capital, and that makes scaling and replication particularly complex. Strengthening and scaling up pipelines of investable projects is therefore going to be critical, and will require the mobilisation of funds for startups, as well as strengthening capacity of many SMEs. So new accelerator and incubator services may be required alongside actually aggregating SMEs in a way that makes them scalable and replicable, and therefore a stronger prospect for investment. Alongside that, new finance mechanisms are going to be required. For example, insurance products can also improve the risk profile as well as incentivise best practice. Blue bonds, sustainable investment funds, debt for nature swaps. There are a number of finance mechanisms out there, and these are only a few that are now coming out on stream. And I would actually recommend referring to the World Economic Forum Friends of Ocean Action Ocean Finance Handbook, which is now online. Finally, data, information and evidence are also going to be absolutely critical to improve decision making, and therefore disaggregating ocean from terrestrial data in national accounts is going to be key. Building national, regional and global data infrastructure, investing in targeted research, as well as increasing transparency, are all going to be central to ensuring that information is practically shared, and that it's therefore supporting improved decision making as well as innovation. Finally, I think the most and probably the most significantly, to deliver a sustainable blue economy, governments, civil society and private sector are going to need to innovate and partner on a scale we probably haven't ever seen before. And collaboration between all stakeholders really does need to be encouraged in order to exchange knowledge and data towards addressing these huge challenges jointly. I think it's also going to be especially important to link the achievement of high-level policy frameworks to delivery on the ground, as well as in water solutions, in order to really demonstrate how these efforts have direct and tangible benefits for people, ecosystems, economies and our society. And so the work must now begin to secure an urgent transition and to really enable a process of building back better or even bluer, as well as to underpin, of course, through that process, the building of environmental, social and economic resilience. So I hope these key aspects of the sustainable blue economy have really resonated with you today, and I wish you well with your discussions. Thank you very much. So what have you seen as the barriers to a sustainable blue economy, and how can these be overcome?
So I did give a brief overview of these barriers in my presentation, and I think the main one of which is actually the lack of sustainable finance that's available to affect the transition to a sustainable blue economy. And as I mentioned, the ocean is in fact quite a high risk investment environment in terms of capacity constraints, data challenges, regulatory gaps, inconsistencies in policy and regulation, lack of transparency, and ability to monitor, control and survey huge tracts of the ocean. So most notably, I think also the complicated tenure arrangements, as well as the lack of monitoring and enforcement, in particular increase the risk profile and create a much less attractive investment environment. I would say that governments have a huge role to play in terms of creating a supportive and enabling environment, and one which reduces the risk profile and attracts sustainable private sector finance. And this really, this environment really needs to also be disincentivizing business as usual, as that is actually the thing that is continuing to erode the natural resource base. So with this in mind, fiscal incentives and disincentives can actually be quite powerful by providing a sort of pre-competitive level playing field for investors. Probably one of the biggest hindrances is the gaps in the data, information and knowledge to inform decisions, in particular regarding the environmental, social and economic implications of business as usual and the critical importance of achieving a sustainable blue economy to society and business. And one area that was identified by the Ocean Finance paper of the High Level Panel for Sustainable Blue Economies, which I was involved in, was that ocean specific data is typically aggregated with terrestrial data in national accounts, and that actually makes insights into the marine environment and ocean-based sectors particularly difficult to derive. So governments can really improve the data needs by disaggregating that data, and they can also invest in targeted research and innovations that support improved data collection. So one example that actually comes to mind is that of Kenya, where we've been working with local fishermen to provide mobile phones and apps, if you like, that collect data on their fisheries. That information goes directly to the Kenyan government, and they're actually able then to do that analysis of those fisheries and provide what I would call an adaptive management of the fishery. So it's extremely useful and effective way to manage fisheries that otherwise have very little data. The other major hindrance to private sector investment is that of the fact that the pipeline of investable and scalable sustainable blue economy projects is quite weak, and consequently there is a real mismatch between projects and available capital. So SMEs in particular face major challenges, and yet they are such a large part of the blue economy. So projects often lack appropriate deal size and risk return ratios in order to match the available capital. And this makes scaling and replication more complex than perhaps in familiar terrestrial sectors. They're also very much affected by capacity limitations, and these could become overcome by dedicated capacity building. And I mentioned the importance of incubators and accelerators in my presentation. There are already a number available, but in terms of public sector, it might be worth looking at the European Commission's Blue Invest programme. And new innovative finance approaches are also very much needed to go alongside these incubators and accelerators, and they should include the opportunity to aggregate some of these small to medium enterprises and small scale projects to ensure that they are indeed investable and scalable. I think it's true to say that even at the larger scales, there is a lack of successful precedent deals, which also reduces investor confidence. And certainly there's a lack of familiarity with ocean-based projects, ocean-based project development and financing by the business and finance sector alike. So dedicated programme of ocean literacy is actually important across the finance sector. And in fact, the Sustainable Blue Economy Finance Initiative is really trying to deliver that. In this regard, also, public sector finance will be key to leveraging private sector through blended finance opportunities. And that means providing upfront investments to carry the risk and address some of the challenges that I've highlighted in this response and throughout my presentation. Thank you. WWF has worked with UNEP and others on sustainable finance principles. What is the uptake to date, and do you have any advice for New Zealand? So in response, I would say, I think the uptake is currently pretty good, considering that the Sustainable Blue Economy Finance Initiative, so that's the platform which hosts and promotes the principles, that was only launched in November 2019. And the Sustainable Blue Economy Finance Initiative now has 64 members, and that's a mix of public and private sector and a few supporting agencies, including WWF. And the private sector finance members represents around 6.9 trillion US dollars in assets under management. In terms of the public sector, WWF worked with the World Bank last year. The World Bank was an early signatory to the principles to engage with multilateral development banks in two kind of, I guess, closed door dialogues around the principles. And as a result of those meetings, the Asian Development Bank and the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development both signed up to the principles. And if you include the EIB, that means we've now got 4 multilateral development banks as signatories. I also mentioned that the Portuguese government have endorsed the principles. They did that in March this year. And whilst there's no, currently there's no formal mechanism for countries to become signatories, UNEP-FI is actually looking at ways to make that happen, as it is highly relevant for countries to sign up to the principles, not least because of the enormous amount of public sector finance targeted at the blue economy. They also provide a strong overarching framework and vision for the sustainable blue economy, so they could actually be used to guide sustainable blue economy planning. And it would actually be excellent to receive feedback from the countries and from this workshop. And I'd really invite the government to engage with UNEP-FI and with founding partners, including WWF, in the development of what would be hopefully an appropriate process for government adoption and engagement. WWF has also developed blue economy principles alongside the finance principles. So how do these principles work together in practice? So in fact, the Sustainable Blue Economy Finance Principles were actually based on the Sustainable Blue Economy Principles, but the language and other aspects are currently pitched more towards, obviously, the finance sector, but both public and private finance, not just private. And when we created the principles, we looked at WWF's Sustainable Blue Economy Principles and other sustainable development frameworks relating to the ocean. So obviously that included SDG 14. And the important thing mentioned about the Sustainable Blue Economy Principles was that they were actually developed in collaboration with a range of ocean-based stakeholders. And I actually believe that's why they have resonated so well. What would you say is the most critical thing that we could do now in New Zealand to set us up on a trajectory to a sustainable blue economy? So I think one of the most important things that the government can do is to protect its natural assets. And these are the foundations of a sustainable blue economy. And this is going to require the creation of strong natural resource management plans and the use of tools that build the resilience and integrity of the ocean. You have them already: marine protected areas, nature-based solutions, and marine spatial planning to obviously also reduce conflicts and address cumulative impacts. So these should not be any longer seen as a nice to have, but really as a critical part of a sustainable ocean economy plan. And ultimately, to deliver a national sustainable blue economy or ocean economy plan and strategy, there is going to need to be greater integration between ministries, so there's more joined up approach. And what we want to ensure is that maintaining biodiversity and natural capital of the ocean is the primary objective of all departments, not least to ensure that finance is being targeted in the right way, so that it's not undermining the health and integrity of ocean ecosystems. So the aim of the plan would ultimately be to build environmental, social and economic resilience. And that's very much in line with the Build Back Better agenda. I think having a strong vision and commitment to a sustainable ocean plan or strategy can really help to coalesce ministries, and the sustainable blue economy principles and finance principles can provide an overarching framework to develop this. Having strong and integrated governance processes to underpin this vision and this plan can also substantially improve the risk profile. And I thought it was interesting to hear more about the Belize case study recently, and I understand that they've now created a high-level interdepartmental committee which is responsible for overseeing and implementing their sustainable blue economy strategy. And I think this really means that there's a high level of commitment to this plan, and that the plan is leading to integrated policy making across the board. It was across all of the ministries. So I hope those responses have incited some deep thoughts on how to deliver a sustainable blue economy in New Zealand. I'd like to thank you again for the opportunity to speak today, and I really look forward to hearing how your discussions have gone. I think it's very exciting times, and look forward to hearing more. All the best.